Hi, brothers and sisters. Take this up. We're gonna do another study. Don't know if it'll be a long one, a short one. I do have quite a bit of information to cover, but because I wrote it all down, I think we might be semi-quick about it. So it's just more or less puzzling the puzzle pieces together in the Bible, again on the divine feminine that they assure us does not exist in the heavens. They tell us the angels are sexless, and then they go on to say he, and God's a he, and there's no she, and yet God made a male and a female in God's image. Isn't that curious? So, but we're going to puzzle some of the pieces together. We're going to keep hitting the nail on the head as often as we need to. So Song of Songs 5:7 says this, and we're going to look at the Watchmen briefly. We could do quite an in-depth study on them, but we're just going to piece a little bit here together. It says in Song of Songs 5:7, it says, "The watchmen found me as they made their rounds in the city, and they beat me. They bruised me. They took away my cloak." Cloak is another representation of the woman as the glory. So here you have actually the Shulamite speaking. And so she says, "The watchmen found me and they beat me." If you think the spirit hasn't been bruised and smoted and wounded for what we did, this is absolute proof that she's endured much because of what we did. And she, yes, the spirit is she, has endured a great deal because of what we did. So the watchmen found me as they made their rounds in the city. They beat me, they bruised me, they took away my cloak, my glory. And those watchmen of the wall, those watchmen of the wall. So Micah 2:8, we can actually link that cloak when we really get pulling all the threads together in the scriptures. And so what does it say in Micah 2:8 regarding these same watchmen, in a sense, to what they did to the daughters of Zion, known as the spirit upon the earth, and what they did with their cloaks? So watch what Micah 2 verse 8 says. It says, "Lately my people have risen up as an enemy. You pull off the robe with the garment from those who trust you as they pass by." And then it says, "Like men returned from war." Well, who was acting like the men returned from war? Well, these were the enemy. And they were rising up against these women that were passing through the gates of David, which Solomon calls the breaches in the wall. And you actually find their blessing as the key of David. That's the allegory here as they pass through the wall of David. These daughters of Zion, and they're passing from Lebanon, which is where the waters flow from that washes us clean. And we're shown that allegory of it being a well, likened to those waters come from your wife, from your spouse, that you see spoken of in Song of Songs again, 4:12 and 15, as well as Proverbs 5. And I'm sure other places that because I'm intent on trying to pull so much of this together, I tend to overlook quite a bit, which I'm sure a lot of you aren't. You're hitting on a lot of it. So what we see here is the men actually, because they're their own men, in Micah 2:8, when you really get a handle on what was going on here, it says, "Lately my people have risen up as an enemy. You pull off the robe with the garment." Now she's talking about the daughters here as they pass through the wall. So they were exposing them. They're exposing their nakedness. Just as if these women, who were their own women, were spoils of war. That's what it's saying. Like men returned from war. That's your understanding. When we actually start to use our brains and start to reason out the text as we were instructed to do by the Holy Spirit and by God above. So again, let's read it to get the full understanding, which is what they were doing to the Shulamite in Song of Songs. "The watchmen found me as they made their rounds in the city. They beat me, they bruised me, they took away my cloak." Those watchmen of the walls. That's what they did to me. We're talking about the Shulamite. And then Micah 2:8, "Lately my people have risen up as an enemy. You pull off the robe with the garment from those who trust you, from your own women who trusted you, as they pass by, like you are men returning from a war. So they were treating these women as if they were spoils of war. And what do men, many places that we've heard of and that we know to be fact as women, what do the men do when they hit women in spoils of war? They tend to strip them naked and, what did they say? Humble them in the Bible. Rape them. That's another word for rape. They humiliate them in every which way possible. And so that's what this verse is saying in Micah 2:8. You behaved as if you were men of war, and you took off the garment with the robe. This was their glory. The garment is supposed to represent the male, the robe, the woman as the glory. The garment as the body, as the temple, is sort of your allegorical understanding. And what were their own men doing? They were treating them as if they were spoils of war. That's what they were doing. And so from there, we're going to go over here, and we'll keep linking this. So you need to keep these verses in the back of your mind. If you want to go in and you want to study all of these passages, I'm sure in the quietness of your own home during your own study time, that you will be able to thread them together so much better than what I'm doing. If you just take the passages down, you go in and you actually read some of the full chapters too, it will really give you a deeper understanding. But what does it say of the crooked path? Okay, so these is all going to connect eventually. Isaiah 59 verse 8, it says, the way of peace they have not known, and there is no justice in their tracks. They have turned them into crooked paths. No one who treads on them will know peace. So we're talking about the path of violence is what we're talking about. And here we have the men of war that comes up, all right, as if they're men at war. And they were perpetuating violence against their very own sisters from Israel who had passed through the breaches. They're called breaches, but they're really gates that belong to them. And I'm going to speculate, like I did in a prior video, that there was 24 of these supposed breaches, plus 12. Because it says in Revelation, it says every other gate was one of pearl. And I said, so that leads to 3 gates. So 3 times 12 gives you a grand total of 36. So the servants' gates would be these 24 gates that these daughters passed through, representing the Spirit of God gave to man in covenant to teach him the laws of heaven. And these daughters would come and go through these gates that we found out that Solomon daubed up over time, and really locked in a harlot spirit that would teach his laws, his lies, and exalt man as God is what it comes down to. And so that's your key of David, and that's what they were doing here, and that's why it also brings in the Shulamite in Songs 5:7. And so to say that woman hasn't borne wounds for the transgression of mankind and womankind is absolutely crazy to even think of it without her in there, when she is mentioned consistently throughout the scriptures, but everybody just casts her off like her suffering and travailing means nothing. But so it says no one who treads on these will know peace, right? So that crooked path actually is going to take us to Isaiah 43, right? So Isaiah 43, what does she say in Isaiah 43? And it is she, that's your spirit. And it's interesting because, before I forget to mention it, when you start reading in Isaiah 40, Isaiah 41, Isaiah 42, Isaiah 43, you're going to realize that the servant of the Lord is identified as Israel, she, and furthermore in Isaiah 43 as the one who will lead them in the straight paths, she. And she says, now will I go forth as a travailing woman, and I will lead them in paths that they have not known. I will lead the blind. All right? Because blind is going to come into this too when we continue on. And Isaiah 43, she says this. I say it's Isaiah 43. I always get my passages wrong. Maybe it's 42. Yeah, it's actually 42. I said it wrong again. So Isaiah 42, she says, I have long time holding my peace. I have been still and I have restrained. They got refrained. I have restrained myself. And now will I cry like a travailing woman. I will destroy and I will devour at once. So remember, destroy and devour. Okay? So this has the idea of God's judgment. So this is going to carry over into some further passages in a minute. So that's what I mean by it's so difficult to hold on to every train of thought because it all does weave together. So it's really good to get in a quiet place, to jot all of these verses down, even the whole chapters, and go in and really pull that understanding together for yourself, because I certainly can't do it. Only you and the Spirit, Holy Spirit, between our hearts, you know, in communion together with one another, is going to be able to pull this understanding together. So she says, now will I cry like a travailing woman. I will destroy and devour at once. I will make waste mountains. There's your mountains. Actually, it's an image, a false image in Daniel 2, where the mountain cut out without hands identified as Zion. And I say it's the 10 tribes, the 10 northern tribes as Israel, which represents the feminine that was rejected out of her rightful place. And I say 10 because it smashes the 10 toes on that false image of a king as your ruler. So she says, I will make waste mountains and hills, and dry up all their herbs, and I will make the rivers islands, and I will dry up their pools. Now, we talked about that throughout our videos as we go. And I will bring the blind, let's remember that, the blind, by a way that they knew not, and I will lead them in paths that they have not known. I will make darkness light before them, and crooked things straight. These things will I do unto them, and I will not forsake them. What does she say? And it says, they shall be turned back. They shall be greatly ashamed that trusted in graven images, that say to the molten images, you are our gods. So God said, you saw no image of me, make no image of me, neither male nor female. And what did they do? They made a triple male image, is what we've ended up with as Christians. Judaic is monotheistic. They believe in one male as God. A male image of God is God. Nothing to do with the divine feminine. And certainly Catholicism, which is part of the Christianity, and Islamists believe in male as God. So we see this false image, which is also represented as that golden idol that Nebuchadnezzar makes in Daniel 2, where you see the stone cut out without hands, representing the Holy Spirit, these daughters, as the 10 northern tribes. And I say 10 because of the 10 toes smashing that false image, and they are cut out without hands because they represent the Holy Spirit reborn upon this earth. So she says, now will I lead them in paths that they have not known. I will make darkness light. So she's going to shed the light on everything, the Holy Spirit is, and she's going to show you the truth. That's what it's saying. And she says, I'm going to take these crooked paths of violence that they perpetuate under their man-made laws, which are both religious and civil laws, or civic laws, she says, and I'm going to make them straight, because you got it all wrong. You created a world that permitted violence under the laws, particularly against your sisters, and claimed it come from me. That's what you did. This is what this claim allows, ever so subtly, to get into your brain and seep into your brain, and you go, well, you know, God says it's okay, and, you know, maybe we deserve it a little bit, and maybe they deserve it a little bit, and you know, we didn't bring on this mess. They did. And it says they cast off restraint around us. They got no problem slamming us to our faces, and they don't watch them. Watch them online. Baby, they can cock out all kinds of mean sayings concerning the feminine, their other half, supposedly. I don't think we're their other half. They want nothing to do with us, if you're talking about the divine feminine. And she's clearly identified. But you have to go in and identify her. You have to determine to do that, and that she does exist. And so Isaiah 40 verse 2, let me see, make sure I got everything here. And Micah 4:10. No, I don't have Micah. Let me see. I don't think I have Micah pulled up. Maybe I do. I do so. So let's pull this up. here in Micah 4:10. Yeah. It says this. Be in pain and labor to bring forth, O daughter of Zion. So we just read Isaiah 42. So this links us to Micah 4, verse 10. These are our puzzle pieces coming together. So be in pain and labor to bring forth, O daughter of Zion, like a woman in travail. For now shalt thou go forth out of the city, and thou shalt dwell in the field, and thou shalt go even to Babylon, and there shalt thou be delivered. There the Lord shall redeem thee from the hand of thine enemy. What that means is the Spirit is going to come upon us again, because we were considered her inheritance, which is also known as the pleasant land that man divides. And he divides that into two covenants. And you are shown those two covenants in Galatians 4 as two women, in allegory to two covenants. One that puts woman under bondage of the laws that came from Mount Sinai. That means Old Testament laws written by the hand of men who wanted to subjugate the righteous sisters under them. And the law that comes from above, which frees us from this ridiculous bondage on our neck, this yoke on our neck. And Christ hinted at that. He told that. He said, my yoke is light. And he was, we're going to get into who his yoke was from. And we know that was God. But we find a deeper understanding of so much of what he said in the Old Testament if we actually go in and link some of the passages that he leads us to. And so, okay. And so some more of the suffering of the divine feminine. Isaiah 40 verse 2, what does it say? Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her forced labor has been completed. Her iniquity has been pardoned. And why? Because she was washed in the blood of a man. The violence perpetuated under the law that shed his blood and created violence to do that, which God says, I required no blood sacrifice of you ever. That didn't come from me. That came from your man-made religious lies. That's what that came from. So what does it say here that makes us understand? It says, she has been pardoned. For what reason? She was washed in blood? No. For she has received from the hand of the Lord double for all of her sins. This is going to take us to that cup in a minute. And there's quite a bit on that when we really get studying that. So, for she has received from the hand of the Lord double for all of her sins. But keep connecting to where we're going with this, because this takes us to the one that goes forth. She is no longer restrained, and she begins to call out in the wilderness, and she begins to show them the light of the truth, and she begins to show them the straight path. And so it says, what does it say in the connecting verse, verse 3? A voice of one calling, prepare the way, the straight way. That's the way you're to prepare. The straight path, not the crooked path of violence. If you want to bring the Lord here, then you better straighten your path of violence, right? And you can't do that without absolutely getting rid of it altogether, right? So there's two laws that's in view here. That law that perpetuates violence, that's the covenant of blood, that you're not washed in blood. You are washed in water. But she says, you have been pardoned. And she's speaking to the daughter of Zion, the daughter of Jerusalem, who is also the restrainer, no longer restrained. In Isaiah 42, who now goes forth like a travailing woman, which links you to Micah 4:10, where she says, I will go forth and there I will be delivered. Well, she's not going to be delivered by a man. That's not what it's telling you. You have to dig deeper than what this man-made religious lie would have you believe. All right? So, prepare the way for the Lord in the wilderness. Make a straight highway for our God in the desert. You see her doing that in Isaiah 42. She is the spirit that travails to bring forth her children in the laws of truth, which came from God above, which was the feminine mother. So after bearing the sins on her own head, as the Azazel goat is what you understand out here, a voice of one, prepare the way for the Lord in the wilderness, make a straight highway for our God in the desert, links you to that Azazel goat that gets cast out into the, where does it say, into wilderness, to wander to and fro. That's an image of the spirit that wanders to and fro. But so after bearing the sins on her own head, which is what the Azazel goat did, she bore the sins, and it was a female goat that did that. She's identified in the Abrahamic covenant in Genesis 15:9 as the second of 5 animals, and 3 of them are female, promised restoration. And I always heard about the ram. Well, that was Christ. That's our king. That's our God. That's our ruler. But I never heard about the other animals at all. Not one peep about them. It was by design. They were not going to come forth until the daughters determined to go and dig these deeper truths out, because it is for us to understand and to teach our children. So she bore the sins upon the head of the Azazel goat. Now, watch what Revelations 18:6 says. And in a second, because I need to make sure I'm getting this right. Okay, now. Okay. So she says also in Hosea 2, linking this to the restrainer, no longer restrained. And that also has the understanding of woman being yoked under man-made religious laws, and the civil laws as well that is made, and as well as our understanding of civic laws, and how we perpetuated ourselves by believing that it's from God, and yeah, we kind of ask for whatever we get. Well, they did too. How come they ain't yoked under the law? How come they get to make the laws and yoke us under their laws and tell us that we were made to serve him, and that there is no female God and there's no such thing as a female angel in the heavens, are sexless, but they say he. Okay. So obviously something's wrong with their picture. Now, we're going to pick up here in Revelations 18:6. It says, give back to, it says her. We're going to show you where this is absolutely him paying up for what he did to her. So it says, tell Jerusalem that her warfare is ended, that she has completed her forced labor. That's under the law, man-made religious law. So it's been completed. It's been pardoned, and it's been pardoned because she has received double at the hand of the Lord for her sins and for her iniquities. Now, in Revelations 18:6, they want to say she. No, we're going to show you that this time, this is the turnaround. He has to pay for what he did to her. Okay? Revelations 18:6, give back to him as he has done to others. Pay him back. It says her. But it is a him this time around. We're going to prove that. Pay him back double for what he has done. Mix him a double portion in, it says, his own cup. Now, where are we going to pick the cup up? The image of the cup up. You watch where we're going to pick it up. We're going to pick it up in Habakkuk 2 is where we're going to pick it up. And watch what it says. It says, what sorrow awaits you who makes your neighbor. Let's key in. Let's go right in on that word, neighbor, drunk. You force your cup. Oh, there's cup. Although it says bottle, it says wineskin. Some of the translations has it as a cup. So it says, you force your cup on them so you can gloat over their shameful nakedness. This is clearly male doing it to a female. They want you to believe it's a man doing it to another man. That's a hard one to swallow. It's actually Judah doing it to Israel, his neighbor, it says here, which is also his sister. Okay? So what sorrow awaits you who make your neighbor Israel, those daughters who are passing through the gates of David, representing the key of David, the spirit of the temple, with the laws of Mother God that flowed from the waters of Lebanon, as we have come to understand. And so they ripped the garments off of them, we realized. The Shulamite speaks of that, the violence being done to her by the watchmen, and then to rip her cloak off her. And then in Micah 2, these men were doing the same thing to these daughters who trusted their brothers of Judah, the men of Judah. Malachi 2 says, You dealt treacherously with the wife of your youth, with the wife of your covenant, identified as Israel. And you married the daughter of a strange god. You wanted a harlot so you could exalt your own self and write your own laws. That's what it comes down to when we get our deeper understanding. So we see them ripping them, stripping them naked, taking their garments off them, taking their cloaks off them, which represents their glory, their mantles. The glory is the woman's mantle, and it's represented by the outer garment, the robe, and the man's is represented by the inner garment. And that represents the temple, the body, and then this overgarment represented the glory. And these men ripped that off, and then we see them putting his cup to her lip. And so it says, you force your cup on them so you can gloat over their shameful nakedness. And they do. This is what they do to the harlot spirit that they created for the purpose that they could point at her and blame her for everything. Though it states in Isaiah 47, that is who his covenant is with and who he hides in his heart. And then she says, with this spirit, she says, no one sees me. I will never be widowless. I will never be childless. Why do you think that's so? Because it says your enemy is wise, right? Very clever in the way that this has all been covered over. And yet, Mother God states to her daughters, who were her inheritance, that men cast a covenant off with the spirit of this covenant found in these daughters and began to turn them. And it states that King Solomon changed the portion in the midst known as Bozrah to a harlot spirit that would teach his religious lies and laws, and in effect subjugate his sister under him as if she was his harlot. And what did they bring into play so heavily? Polygamy. They married all that they chose to. That was not of God. That's a man wanting to play God. And then they preach it as if it is from God. No, that was never from God. That was what they were doing here. They were putting the cup, which is representative of the lying theology, as wine to her lips and getting her drunk, all right? So that over time, she forgot who she was. And it actually states that a stupor or a torpor, not a stupor, but a torpor came upon these daughters, and they actually went to sleep in the spirit is the idea. Which is then why you find all those verses in your Old Testament concerning the Lord that is asleep. And when that Lord awakes and is so angered by the false image that she sees parading around playing God, and that image there is male, and the Lord there is 136, and that is daughter Zion's number identified in the scriptures. And so he says, so they could gloat over their shameful nakedness. Now we're going to get to the cup, all right? But Micah 4:11 also further backs this up when it says, now also many nations are gathered against thee that say, let her be defiled, and let her eyes look upon Zion. They want to bring her down. They do not want the spirit of this covenant. And the spirit of this covenant is identified as the daughter of Zion. They razed this stronghold to the ground and built up Babylon as the covenant that they were going to be in covenant with, so they could exalt themselves. That's what it's telling us. And so they say, let her eyes look upon Zion, let her be defiled. And they said, razz her to the ground. We don't want her for our stronghold. And her laws were laws of peace, equity. It says truth has staggered in the street and equity cannot enter. You see? And this is the casting down of the truth of the earth. And they began to shed heavy violence, shed blood in the earth through heavy violence and laws that perpetuated this. And even make the claim that violence was part of God's law. No, that was man. That was man's law, not God's. God's were laws of peace, love, truth, equity, fairness to all. No favoritism to a man over a woman or a woman over a man. They were equal in God's eyes. And God says, I don't take bribes. I never did and I never will. That's not how I operate. And yet these men, when we get studying them, that's exactly what they wanted. They wanted bribes. They wanted money. They wanted women. They wanted whatever power they could get. And that's what these laws, these man-made laws, came to do. And really yoke their sisters heavily under those laws, to the point where God says, you yoke your sisters under the laws and put bondage on them that you yourself can't even bear. And so what does it say in verse 12? Right after we say, let our eyes look upon Zion. The nations are saying this. And verse 12 it says, but they know, that's a Micah. But verse, we'll get there. So 15, Habakkuk 2:16, it says, you will be filled with shame instead. Okay, so let's just recap here so we don't lose sight of this verse. Revelations 18:6. Give back to him as he has done to others. Pay him back double for what he has done. Mix him a double portion in his own cup. What did it say in Isaiah 40 verse 2? Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her forced labor has been completed. Her iniquity has been pardoned, for she has received from the hand of the Lord double for all of her sin. And that came through way of the law, being yoked under his man-made law. And so Revelations 18:6, she says, mix him a double portion. And then we find that cup that has the double portion in Habakkuk 2:16, after he got his sister drunk on his lying theology so he could expose her nakedness and gloat about it and make her feel ashamed. And that's just what he has done. And Habakkuk 2:16, you will be filled with shame instead of glory. You too must drink and expose your uncircumcision, your foreskin. What did we find out circumcision represented? To be circumcised meant that you would stay in covenant with God's righteous spirit, the Holy One of Israel, daughter Zion. To have a foreskin meant that you sought a covenant with the harlot spirit that would exalt you, Baal, man, husband, as Lord and God over the earth. And so that's the symbology here of the foreskin and the uncircumcised. You too must drink and expose your foreskin, just like you made her feel ashamed by yoking her under your law and telling all your religious lies about how it's all her fault and a man has to bear all of her sins, the bride's sins. And yet it says, tell her that she has received double for all of her sins. That's not a man receiving them for her. That is her receiving them under the man-made lies and laws and yoking her with a heavy bondage. And that's what he did. So it says, the cup. All right, we'll read this again. You will be filled with shame instead of glory. You too must drink and expose your foreskin. The cup in the Lord's right hand will come around to you, and utter disgrace will cover your glory, which is what they did to her. They made her feel deeply ashamed for being a woman. That's what they did with their religious lies, and puff up their chest because being male makes you superior, makes you godlike, and there's no such thing as the divine feminine that ever had to bear bruises or whippings or scourgings of any kind. They've had it easy, easy peasy. It's him who's had it so hard. Well, that's the teaching of his man-made religious lie, is what that is. And allows him to force this idea that he's superior to her and that there is no equality under God's laws here on earth, and certainly not above. And I think they really are hoping that in their heart, right? You know, I've even had men say this to me, especially when I was in my teens. I got this quite a bit. Well, obviously, you know, men are, you know, they wouldn't come right out and say superior, but that's what they were beating around and saying. So we know because they're higher here, they're also going to be higher there. That's what they believe. They believe it based on their own man-made lies. That's why they believe it. That's not God. That's not the character of God. That's not the spirit of God. That's the spirit of Baal and his harlot that bows to him and allows him to believe that to be so. And yet she says, I will not forsake you. I will lead you in paths that you have not known. I will make the crooked things straight again. I will deliver you, is what she says. But she says to those men of Baal in Jeremiah 23, she says, oh, don't worry. You're such a burden to me to deliver. You'll be no burden to me because I won't deliver you. I'll cut you away. Just like who you're in covenant with, the harlot. I'll cut you away. That's what's going to happen. And it's all there for anybody who wants to open their eyes. But if you want to play dum-dum and keep harping and saying, well, no, I just don't believe that there's a such thing as a female God that gives life. I just don't believe. Well, there's something wrong with your eyeballs. There's really something wrong. And the words in Greek, and I can't remember them right offhand, I can maybe put them underneath, states that in order to understand the spiritual world, you better open your eyes to this physical world and see what's going on in order to bridge the difference between them, to understand what's going on. And so God says, don't give me your excuses. I'll have none of it. Especially with my woke daughters here. Their spirit is no longer in torpor. They are fully awake. They now understand the truth. And you're not going to step up to me and say, hey, I didn't get it. I just didn't understand it. Especially when she says in Romans 1:20, she says, you're without excuse not to understand the Godhead. I showed you it in my very creation. So you're not going to stand before me and say, well, you know what, I just didn't know. It just didn't make no sense to me. She says, that's okay, boys. If it don't make sense to you and you think that a female God, it's too much of a burden for her to deliver children, then don't worry. I won't deliver you. I won't show you the straight path. I won't show you the light. I'll leave you in darkness, and I'll leave you on that crooked path where there is no peace to ever be found. That's where I'll leave you. And so there's no excuses, girls. There's no excuses, guys, for saying you didn't get it. That's what she's saying. So she says, the cup in the Lord's right hand will come around to you, and utter disgrace will cover your glory. And the fulfilling of these words here are what you see in Revelations 18:6 when they try to say she. Oh no, she's took her bling. She's had that yoke on her since she started playing man's harlot. And it was a forced labor. She did not go willingly. She fought it. It speaks of the death and the violence against many of these women. They had their children ripped out of their wombs. So don't tell me women haven't suffered for the truth, all right? And but they want to say, no, women don't know what suffering's about. No, they don't. But shameful spewing's going to come upon his foreskin, and that is fulfilled. And but if you read up in Habakkuk and you start at like around verse 12, do I have Habakkuk pulled up here? It really tells you many things. Yeah, Habakkuk 2, verse 13. Woe to him who builds a city with bloodshed and establishes a town by iniquity. Verse 13. Is it not indeed from the Lord of hosts that the labor of the people only feeds the fire, and the nations weary themselves in vain? So what's she talking about? She's talking about current laws, religious lies, and religious theology that they're wearying themselves. All you're producing is more fuel for the fire. That's all you're doing. There's no deliverance in the earth through this man-made law. That's what she's saying here. Is it not indeed from the Lord of hosts that the labor of the people only feeds the fire, and the nations weary themselves in vain? My laws were not the laws that you wrote here. This is what is destroying our earth. My laws is represent as the water that will wash the bloodshed off of you. That's why she speaks of my daughters will be washed. All their bloodshed will be washed off of them. That's the violence that gets perpetuated under the law, man-made law. All right? In verse 14, for the earth will be filled with the knowledge of the glory of the Lord as the waters cover the sea. All right? And then in 15, what sorrow awaits you who makes your neighbor drunk, who gets your sister Israel drunk on your lying theology, that's your admixture of doctrine in the cup of water mixed with blood. which then turns into the Red Sea that you see Moses parting, all right? And that parting of the Red Sea is your two covenants in allegory of the two women that you find in Galatians 4. And only then can the children be pushed out through or birthed out through, and it's through the truth. And the reason why Moses could do that is for the same reason that Christ says what he says in Luke 4:18. We're going to look at that in a minute. But the reason is because he was filled with the Spirit of who his true covenant was with, which was the daughter of Zion, and she alone birthed the children out through. That's why Mother God says, I set a boundary in Job 38. And she says, none of you will pass it with the harlot spirit on you. None of you. Only my daughters can birth and deliver the children. Okay, so again to the cup before we come down to Luke 4 where we want to look at. But Psalm 16, it is the daughter Zion speaking here in Psalm 16, and she speaks of the cup that she takes. And she says, I will take the cup. This is verse 13, Psalm 116, verse 13. I will take the cup of salvation. So it's telling us how salvation is wrought in the earth by God. So here, this she is daughter Zion that takes the cup. They got the whole chapter as a he, of course. I will take the cup of salvation. We know she took the cup. She had double for her sins. I will take the cup of salvation and call upon the name of the Lord, and I will pay my vows unto the Lord now in the presence of her people. So she agrees to take this cup, all right, that has this, for she has received from the hand of the Lord double for all of her sins, all right? She has took the forced labor upon her. Her taking this cup in her hand, the daughter Zion was agreeing to this covenant, to the fulfilling of this covenant, that she would indeed be under the bondage of the man-made law that would yoke her under his covenant with the harlot. So she takes that cup. But then in verse 14, she agrees that she will pay her vows, okay? And that vow actually is when the cup returns back to her hand, where shameful spewing comes upon his foreskin. So it is the complete fulfilling, and the vow is to be in covenant with the righteous sons as the righteous Holy Spirit. But we see her in full agreement with the Holy Spirit of Mother God upon her, actually in Zechariah chapter 11, verse 7. And she takes two staffs to herself. One she writes her own name on, and the other she writes her inheritance on. And the inheritance is called the poor of the flock. The poor of the flock is these women who comes to be yoked under man-made law. We know the law makes women poor, makes her susceptible to his lies, his laws. She has to play his harlot. Many are prostituted in order to pay the bills because they are made so poor under his lies and his laws. That's why we have rampant pornography, prostitution, we have rape. All of those things are rampant because man has all of his rights gave to him. One of such is pornography. Prostitution is legalized for his sake, not hers. But it also puts her in subjection to him, is what it causes, because his laws yokes her, makes her poor, because she has not the rights that he has. Though, yes, today we see an appearance of those, and we could discuss that in a totally different way. But we're not going to get into that. So, but in Zechariah chapter 11:7, she takes two staves, and it says, when she breaks those staves, the poor of the flock knew what it meant, and the poor of the flock was her inheritance, represent as these daughters of Zion. And what they knew it meant was that the Holy Spirit, the righteous Spirit, who Adam's first covenant was with, but he tore her down, didn't want her, he accused her, he pointed at her, that's what he does, and gloats over her shameful nakedness, that's what he does, he gloats over it after he caused it. And so she breaks this, and the daughters recognize this as from God, realizing that that spirit is going to come off of them, and they are going to be forced into hard bondage under man-made laws. And God is going to permit it to be so. That's what she says. And it's permitted so that the nations can be reconciled back, and that the healing of the daughter can take place. Because we hear this in Jeremiah 9:3. It says, they bend their tongues like bows. Lies prevail over truth in the land. That's what's going on right now. For they proceed from evil to evil, from generation to generation, and hand it off from hand to son, from father to son. And they do not take me, that's the righteous spirit, the righteous daughters, into account, declares the Lord. And what does the Lord say to the sons in Jeremiah 8? And she says it in Jeremiah 6. She says, you have healed the hurt of the daughter of my people slightly, saying, peace, peace, when there is no peace. And that is akin to what they're saying, actually, in 1 Thessalonians chapter 5, when they're saying, peace and security, but they shall not escape, for travails will come upon them as a woman in travail. Well, the they there that they all like to say is Christians. No, the they is them. Because they are preaching a lie that preaches a he, and that he died to cleanse a she. That is not the healing of the daughter. That is a lie. And it says that then sudden destruction will come upon them as a woman in travail. You find these men travailing in Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 6. And they are unable to deliver the children, because it is she who is supposed to do it. That's why it says, you have healed the hurt of the daughter of my people slightly. You have lied to them. You have told them religious lies that exalts you and debases them and prevents them from delivering their very own children into everlasting life. And that's why it says that verse in Isaiah 26. It says, the women we have brought forth wind. And the word there for wind, you got to go to Greek 4:17, means empty doctrines. And the empty doctrines is him who put the admixture of lies to her lips and got her drunk so he could expose her nakedness and point at her, which is what he's continuing to do. But it's the Jezebel spirit exalted in his heart that's making him God of this earth. But yet it says, give back to him as he has done to others, as he has done to her. And he did it in Habakkuk chapter 2. It shows you that. And they have not healed the hurt. And they can say, peace, peace, when there is no peace. You have not healed their hurt. You continue to write this religious lie and make laws founded upon it. And you yoke her as if it is a God-given right. It is a right gave to you by yourselves, called Baal, who shot at those daughters who passed through the gates of David in Joseph's blessings. And Genesis 49 verses 23 and 24, though it says their covenant, their bow abode in strength, right? And it says those archers, those men of Baal, shot at those branches, those sisters, as they passed through the gates of, it was David's wall, because they were passing from actually the north kingdom, Israel, their neighbor, their sister, that they put the strong drink to. After they wall up the breaches, it says Solomon did this. But they shoot at them. They rip the cloak off of them. They begin to treat them as if they are spoils of war. And it's all there. But what does Christ say? Okay, moving along here. What does Christ say in Luke 4? I think it's 18 I got there. It says, the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, he says. Because it's not he when we get our understanding of who he's talking about. And you have to go back to the Old Testament, because he's referencing the Old Testament verses here, is what it tells you. So the Spirit of the Lord is upon me, because she has anointed me to preach the good news to the poor, to the women, largely. She has sent me to proclaim liberty, that's freedom for all, equality under the law, not your man-made religious laws. It says she's got to bow to you because you're a man and you're her head. No, that came from the king of Esther in the Old Testament, where he decreed a law that said every woman would bow to her Baal, her husband, as Lord and Master. That's what that stated. And they just carried it through in the New Testament because they liked the way it sounded. It tickled their ears. It's like honey on their tongue, but it's wormwood, it's poison in their stomach. And so he says, she has sent me to proclaim liberty to the captivity and recovery of sight to the blind. I will lead the blind in pathways that they have not known. I will open their eyes. I will give them light instead of darkness. They will see the truth. So this is what he's saying here. In recovery of sight to the blind, to release the oppressed. Who's the oppressed? And to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. All right, now, let's understand what the year of the Lord's favor is and who the Spirit of the Lord here is that is upon him. So in order to do that, all you have to do is go to Isaiah 61. Now, I have Isaiah 61 pulled up, and we're going to read it. So Isaiah 61, these are the exact verses that Christ quoted. All right? The Spirit of who is this? The Sovereign Lord. Guess whose number that is? That's daughter Zion's number. We identified her. That's her number. So the Spirit of daughter Zion, my key of David, the laws of peace that I exalt in my heart as the Spirit of my covenant comes from her, the Sovereign Lord, which is identified as the daughter of Zion. Isaiah 61, verse 1, he quotes these exact verses in Luke 4, verses 17, 18, 19, somewhere in there. The Spirit of the Sovereign Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim the good news to the poor. She has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted. That's, you have healed the hurt of the daughter of my people slightly, saying peace, peace, when there is no peace. To proclaim freedom for the captives and release from darkness for the prisoners. This is what he says, and he's quoting the Old Testament here in Luke. And to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor, and what else? And the day of our God's vengeance, to comfort all who mourn. So who did the Lord favor? We know the Lord favored Israel. And the Lord refers to her servant, who will receive back not only Israel as her children, but also the Gentile nations. All nations will be hers. And it's a promise gave to her not only in Isaiah 49, but also in Psalm 2. And she says, this day have I begotten thee. And she's not talking about a son. She is talking about her daughter of Zion. And she's also called Ephraim, the firstborn daughter, not son, of her womb. That's what she's talking about. And so here he says to heal up the brokenhearted and to proclaim that captives will be released and prisoners will be freed. And what did it say in Isaiah 59? It says, truth staggered in the street after they ripped these garments off of these daughters and their cloaks off of them, and began to treat them like they were spoils of war. And they began to humiliate them. They got them drunk so they could expose their nakedness. These were the daughters of Israel, their sisters, their neighbors, that Judah in Malachi 2 was supposed to not deal treacherously with, yet is she the wife of thy covenant. And so you have all of that, right? And the Spirit that was upon him is identified in Isaiah 61 as the Sovereign Lord, and we identified that as daughter Zion's number. He's telling you that's the Spirit that was upon me. She is the one whom I am in covenant with. And what does it say? Know ye not, he that is joined to a harlot is a harlot? Christ was not joined to the harlot spirit. Christ was joined to the Sovereign Lord. That was the Spirit that was upon him. And and what does it say? In Isaiah, it leads, all of it leads us to Isaiah 42:1. Here is my servant, and the servant is identified as Israel, whom I uphold, my chosen one, in whom my soul delights. This is the daughter Zion. And what most don't understand is this group of daughters called the pleasant land, Mother God's Spirit inhabited these daughters in a very powerful way, and they were considered her personal inheritance, in which she worked through and brought the law to the men of Judah and to the nations of Israel and Judah, the male and the female. And he dealt treacherously with her. Malachi 2 tells you that. And so she's identified as the servant here. It's not a man identified. It is she identified. And when you read Isaiah 40, like we just did, it's talking about her and her warfare being ended. She has received a pardon for her iniquity. She has received double under the law of a violent law, of a crooked path, that now she goes forth and makes straight. She makes darkness light. And then as you keep reading in Isaiah 40, 41, 42, 43, it is identified her servant as Israel. And Isaiah 43 furthers all of that. Isaiah 42, now will I cry like a travailing woman. So we've identified much of the feminine in scriptures that they say don't exist in the heavens. And certainly if she did, she's to blame for it all, and she's never had to bear any of it. Really? Travail lines up with a woman travailing to bring forth her children, and that is what she does. She's also identified as the heifer in the Abrahamic Sarah covenant as Israel, the servant of the Lord. And then you have the she-goat, which is the daughter Zion, chosen out as the particular favorite one for the spirit of the actual mother God to come upon, is what it looks like. Then she has a further inheritance of these daughters, 144,000, which we identified as the camp of Mahanaim, which was God's camp. They were called that because that's who Mother God inherited and dwelt upon with her spirit. And then we find them further identified with the Shulamite. It says, return, return, O Shulamite. What might we see when the Shulamite returns? As it was the camp of Mahanaim, the presence of the Lord here on earth. And so you can read all of that. And you're going to find there's other passages. And but nobody can cause it to come together for you but the Holy Spirit. The Holy Spirit is the only one that can do that for you and put it all together. But the more you dig, and the more you take that ridiculous clay off your eyes that there's no female, and that you've got really nothing to do but just to sit back and twiddle your thumbs while they say peace. Oh, don't worry, the wrath isn't appointed unto you. Peace, peace, when there is no peace. That's right. No harlot spirit is going to pass my boundary with a man-made religious lie in your mouth. You do not enter into my heavens. I don't think so. And it's all there. But nobody wants to understand it because, well, I just don't believe that for a second. Well, you know what? You don't have to. God says, I give you the choice. You'll be no burden to me. I won't deliver you. It'll either be snip, snip, and I burn you away, and I'll simply use you to fertilize the new fields that come along. That's all. Because you won't be good for nothing else. I give you a choice. I give you free will. I thought I gave you understanding, but apparently you're not allowed to use that. Nope. Because they've already shaped it all out for you, this religious lie and laws, and you gobble them up instead of looking for the deeper understanding. But it is there to be had by any who wants to receive it, and that's what she says. She says, I will deliver you. You want to receive the spirit of this covenant of peace and love and truth and equity and fairness, you will have it. I don't hold it back from anyone who truly wants to receive it. But if you want to keep walking on that crooked path, and you love the violence, and it just tickles your ears so much, she says, the snare they laid for you to fall into, my daughters, they fall into it themselves and they can't escape it. It eats them alive to think for 5 seconds that there's truth to this. And but God says, you'll be no burden to me. I won't deliver you, but I do give you the choice. So there's another video. I thank all for watching, and I do pray the Lord bless you all with an abundance of truth. And well, I hope you have a nice evening, and thanks for watching.